Hey guys, tonight we wander into the heart of West Africa, down a sun-drenched trail leading to the tiny town of Niani, tucked along the slow, shimmering flow of the Sankarani River. You tread softly on red earth, the air thick with the sweet, damp scent of rain-drenched trees. The world hums with the soft chatter of merchants, the clinking of wooden tools, and somewhere in the distance, a mother scolding her child for splashing too hard in the shallows. And there playing by the riverbank barefoot and oblivious is a boy named Musa. You watch him trace lazy circles in the mud with a stick. Just a regular kid in a world that has no idea he'll one day rule an empire. You catch a faint sparkle in the sand beside him. Gold dust. Yes, actual gold. But around here, that's just Tuesday. See, you're standing in Mali, a land so rich in gold that people sweep it off the streets like sand. And yet none of the villagers crowding the market square, none of the fishermen pulling up their nets imagine for a second that this quiet boy, the one trying to catch a frog with his bare hands, will become Mansa Musa, the richest man the world will probably ever know. Of course, you probably won't survive a West African childhood in the 13th century. Between wild animals, diseases with charming names like swamp fever, and the occasional raider, it's a miracle anyone did. But Musa, he's made of quiet stubbornness and curiosity. The kind of kid who stares too long at the horizon thinking about places no one else dares to dream of. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Musa's early years aren't carved in stone or even scribbled on a handy parchment, but you drift along with the whispers of history. He's born into the Keita dynasty, a royal line with more political drama than a reality show. His family claims descent from a man named Sundiata Keita, a half-mythical warrior king who supposedly founded the Mali Empire after defeating a sorcerer king. Historians still argue whether Sundiata actually pulled off half the feats sung about in griot tales, or if West Africa just really loved a good underdog story. Young Musa isn't first in line for anything. He's more of a second cousin, twice removed kind of noble, which means he gets the perks of royal blood, like not being a slave, but none of the power. He learns to read the Quran, sharpen a spear, and politely nod at elders. And like most kids around here, he hears bedtime stories about crocodile-infested rivers and sand dunes that swallow entire caravans. But here's the quirky bit: Mali's wealth isn't built on conquest alone. It thrives on something less flashy patience. Traders haul gold, salt, and ivory across blistering deserts, risking their lives to reach markets in Egypt, Morocco, and even Europe. The empire's power pulses along these trade routes like lifeblood in a web of dusty veins. Musa grows up knowing that sometimes the richest man is the one willing to wait. One afternoon, you spot Musa watching a caravan roll into town. Camels stacked high with sacks of salt, their bells jangling softly. The traders talk of far-off cities, Cairo, Tunis, Mecca names that make Musa's heart beat a little faster. He listens, and he dreams. But history's funny that way. While other royal children jostle for favor and stage clumsy power plays, Musa keeps his head down, eyes wide open. He's a quiet observer in a world too loud to notice him yet. And while you stand there in the fading heat of a Malian sunset, it's hard not to wonder. What twists of fate are lining up in the shadows waiting to hand this boy the golden keys to an empire? You're still in Niani, but the air feels heavier now, not with dust or storm, but with possibility. The boy by the river is gone. In his place stands a young man taller, calmer, watchful. You see Musa not as a child anymore, but as a quiet figure on the edges of Mali's court, one step removed from power, but never far from its scent. He walks past elders who barely glance at him. He bows in the right places, says the right things, but he watches. Always watching. See, Mali isn't just villages and marketplaces, it's an empire of tension wrapped in gold. You can feel it in the way people lower their voices when discussing the king. That would be Mansa Abubakari Damoekim, also called a Sakura. In some traditions, though, historians still argue whether those are two kings or the same man. The records are about as clear as a sandstorm, but what they agree on is the man on the throne has a strange obsession. He doesn't want to stay in Mali. You hear it late one night in a courtyard where candles flicker against clay walls. A group of royal advisors is arguing in hushed tones. The king, they say, wants to sail west beyond the ocean's edge. He believes there are lands across the Atlantic, maybe even civilizations, and he intends to find them. Historians still debate whether this was genius madness or just royal boredom. But it's true, Abu Bakari II launches an expedition with hundreds of ships full of sailors' provisions and gold. They vanish into the Atlantic and never come back. It's not a coup. There's no civil war, no assassination. Just absence. And so with a kingdom now awkwardly missing a ruler, someone has to take the reins. And that someone unexpectedly quietly is Musa. You're there in the palace when it happens. It isn't dramatic. No trumpets, no parades. A group of senior advisors simply walks into the court, looks at Musa, and says something that roughly translates to, well, it's your turn now. The title is Deputy Mansa, a kind of acting king while the real one is away. But it doesn't take long for acting to become actual. Because after months, then years, the ocean remains silent. No sails return, no messenger birds, no survivors, just waves. And Musa. He doesn't hesitate. This right here is your mainstream fact. In 1312, C.E. Musa becomes Mansa of Mali, assuming full control of one of the richest and most complex empires in medieval history. But here's the quirky little twist: Musa doesn't throw a coronation. No feasts, no ceremonies carved into stone. Oral tradition says the only marker of his ascension was a shift in how people bowed. One day it was a nod, the next a full prostration. That's it. That's history, baby. You'd think someone inheriting an empire might panic, but Musa walks through it like someone who's been preparing his whole life. You notice how he meets with traders before ministers, how he talks to scholars before generals, how he pays attention not just to Mali, but to what lies beyond it. Because Musa doesn't just want to hold Mali. He wants to connect it to the Islamic world, to Europe, to lands most of his people only know from poetry or rumor. His first act: strengthen the trade routes. You join him as he inspects the caravans that cross the Sahara, those grueling 40-day treks through blistering heat and endless dunes. Traders bring salt from Taghaza, gold from the Bambouk mines, ivory from the forest lands, and slaves from raids and markets. Musa reorganizes these routes like a man rearranging furniture in a house that's far too big and far too messy. And if you look closer, you'll notice something fascinating. He never travels without a group of scribes. Even in the dustiest desert towns, he's recording things. Prices, people, stories. Musa is cataloging his world. Historians still argue whether this obsession with record-keeping was political, spiritual, or just deeply personal. But you get the sense it gave him control, like writing something down made it real. And real things could be ruled. Meanwhile, back in Niani, whispers begin to change. He was just a placeholder, they used to say. Now they call him the Golden King. Not because of a crown, but because he moves through the empire like someone who knows what he's doing. You catch glimpses of him deep in conversation with elders planning tax reforms. You see him consult with merchants about camel breeding and salt pricing. He even meets with scholars about the stars. Not because he wants to gaze at them, but because he wants to navigate by them. And that's when you realize this man isn't looking down at his empire. He's looking out far beyond its borders, dreaming of something much bigger. He isn't just holding power, he's shaping it. And he's only just begun. You stay close as Musa settles into his role, not with grand speeches or fiery battles, but with something far rarer in a ruler: patience. You'd expect a new king freshly crowned by accident to scramble for control. Maybe raise taxes, maybe march an army somewhere just to prove a point. But not Musa. Instead, you find him walking among merchants, quietly learning how gold flows like a river, and how quickly it can dry up if you don't know where the currents run. He listens, he watches, he waits. Because Musa understands something few rulers of his time or any time ever do. Wealth isn't just about hoarding, it's about moving. Gold locked in a vault feeds no mouths, builds no cities. But gold in the hands of merchants, builders, and scholars, that builds an empire. Your mainstream fact. Under Musa's early leadership, Mali controls nearly half the world's known gold reserves. His empire's wealth doesn't come from plunder, but from patient, disciplined trade. The Bambouk and Bouré goldfields pour treasure into the markets of Timbuktu, Gao, and Janae, each city growing fat and lively on the back of Musa's careful management. But here's the quirky detail most people miss. Even though gold dust was so common in Mali that people used it for everyday purchases, Musa enforced strict rules about gold nuggets. Nuggets belonged to the king. You could trade dust, but if you found a nugget, congratulations, you just became a royal donor. Not exactly winning the medieval lottery. And here comes the historical debate one you overhear in quiet courtrooms and smoky markets. Was Mali's wealth sustainable, or was Musa quietly draining the empire's coffers to fund his grand ambitions? Some say he built a golden age. Others whisper that he spent a fortune no ruler after him could ever replace. The truth. Probably a little of both. You join him as he walks through bustling markets in Janae. His robe simple, but his presence unmistakable. People bow, but more out of respect than fear. Because Musa doesn't rule by sword. He rules by understanding where the swords are and making sure they stay sheathed. He knows the merchants by name, the caravan leaders by reputation. He even greets scholars like old friends, and you realize the richest man in the world. He doesn't shout commands, he whispers opportunities. On a cool evening, you watch Musa sit with elders beneath a baobab tree. The talk is soft trade agreements, marriage alliances, border disputes. But then the conversation shifts and you hear Musa's voice, low, thoughtful. He speaks about a dream, a vision. A Mali connected not just to the Sahara trade, but to the Islamic world. To Cairo, to Mecca, even to distant Europe. His words don't stir cheers. They stir curiosity. The idea that Mali, a kingdom most maps don't even bother to name, could be part of something bigger. And that's when you understand. Musa doesn't want to be king of Mali. He wants to be king of possibility. That vision starts small. He builds roads, actual roads linking villages, markets, and cities. He establishes rest stops for traders crossing the punishing desert routes. He standardizes weights and measures a detail most rulers ignore, but one that makes merchants love him. But most of all, he invests in people. You meet a young scholar named Mohammed al-Fulani, a wandering teacher from the far-off lands of Fez. Musa invites him to Timbuktu not with threats, but with gold. And the promise of a school. That's the moment you realize Musa isn't just growing his empire, he's planting it. Historians still argue whether Musa's early projects were calculated empire building, or just a shrewd leader following his instincts. But as you watch the first madrasa open in Timbuktu with students spilling out the doors, you don't need a historian to tell you this man is shaping something that will outlive him. And you floating in the quiet wake of his footsteps can almost feel the pulse of an empire shifting beneath your feet. This isn't just a golden age. It's the soft, slow heartbeat of a dream waking up. You move with Musa now, not through palaces or study halls, but out along the Saharan trade routes where wealth isn't counted in coins, but in the steady rhythm of caravan footsteps across endless dunes. The Sahara stretches before you like a golden sea rolling silent and deadly. And yet somehow it's Mali's lifeline. Because Musa understands the secret of the desert. Whoever controls the trade routes controls the world. So you follow him into the heart of that slow motion economy. You pass camel trains stretching beyond the horizon, their backs burdened with salt blocks from Tagaza, white as bone, precious as gold. You see merchants wiping sweat from their eyes as they lead camels laden with gold dust, ivory cola nuts, and yes, slaves. Your mainstream fact. By the early 14th century, Mali was the commercial hub of West Africa, controlling key Saharan trade routes that linked sub-Saharan kingdoms with North Africa and the Mediterranean world. But this isn't just about goods. It's about survival. You watch Musa reorganize the caravan routes, setting up protected rest stops places with water shade and safety from raiders. Traders begin calling these outposts Mansa's gifts. And then there's the quirky detail. You can't quite believe some merchants coated their camels and even themselves with a layer of animal fat or butter before crossing the dunes. Why? To protect their skin from the searing desert heat. Smelling like a rancid stew, worth it if it meant not blistering alive. You travel with a caravan for days watching as traders speak a half dozen languages, haggling in Arabic, Soninka Berber, and languages you've never even heard of. Musa walks among them unnoticed by most, but learning from all. And this is where you realize Musa isn't building wealth. He's weaving it. He threads together people from every corner of the known world. Gold miners from Wangara, salt merchants from Tagaza, scholars from Fez, spice traders from Cairo, and somehow they all end up tied together in the invisible net of Mali's trade routes. But behind the glittering goods and flowing gold, there's a darker thread, a fact you can't ignore. Slavery. Musa's caravans don't just carry salt and gold, they carry people. Enslaved men, women, and children traded like livestock across borders, sold into lives of labor in North Africa and the Middle East. Historians still argue whether Musa personally condoned or simply tolerated the trade, or whether he saw it as an unavoidable part of the era's brutal economic reality. But one thing is certain, you see the chains. You hear the names called, the prices set. And even amid the shining wealth of Mali that shadow lingers, Musa never abolishes it, but he also never glorifies it. It's there a quiet, uncomfortable truth traveling alongside the gold and salt. And yet, you see Musa trying to make the journey safer, the trade more humane. He sets limits on treatment, creates trade codes, enforces caravan protection. Does it fix the cruelty? No. But it shows you something about the man. He's not just a king chasing riches. He's a man navigating a broken world, trying to guide it with the tools he has. On a rare cool evening, you sit beside Musa near a desert outpost. The sky glows with stars so bright they feel close enough to touch. And Musa speaks not as a king, but as a man. He talks about connection, about how trade isn't just wealth, it's how cultures meet, how ideas spread, how strangers become allies. And that's when you finally see it. Musa's empire isn't built on gold, it's built on trust. And trust, you realize, is harder to forge than any gold coin. You step into the city of Timbuktu now, not the sleepy village you might have imagined, but a buzzing hub alive with voices from every corner of the known world. Dust hangs in the air, kicked up by traders, scholars, and travelers crowding the narrow streets. You hear languages crashing together like waves: Arabic, Soninka, Tuareg, Fulani, Hebrew, and a dozen more. And somewhere in this vibrant tangle of humanity, Musa is at work. But not as a conqueror, as a builder. You follow him to a modest mud brick compound, where scholars sit cross-legged on woven mats reciting verses, copying texts, debating under the soft hum of the desert breeze. This is no palace, no treasure vault. It's a university. Your mainstream fact: under Mansa Musa's reign, Timbuktu became a center of Islamic learning, attracting scholars from as far as Cairo, Baghdad, and Granada. The Sankarani Madrasa, which Musa funded, would grow into one of the most important intellectual centers of the medieval world. But here's the quirky nugget for you. It's said that Musa sometimes paid visiting scholars with literal bags of gold. Not in royal gifts, but as thank you tokens for sharing their knowledge. Imagine giving a TED Talk and getting a sack of treasure in return. You wander with him through the streets of Timbuktu as he personally oversees the construction of mosques, libraries, and schools. He isn't shouting orders. He's listening, asking architects for advice, sitting with scholars to understand their needs. You catch moments that almost feel too human for a king of such legend. Musa stooping to inspect the brickwork of a library wall. Musa pausing to chat with a group of children, reciting verses by heart. Musa sharing a quiet joke with a stonemason. And you realize he's not just building buildings, he's building a future. Historians still argue whether Musa understood the full impact of this educational renaissance, or if it was simply a side effect of his religious devotion. Was he investing in knowledge as a form of worship? Or empire building? Standing there beside him, you suspect it was both. You sit in on a debate inside a sunlit madrasa. Scholars argue over law, theology, astronomy, even medicine. The room hums with ideas, and for a moment you forget you're in the 14th century. Because this feels modern. A place where curiosity isn't punished but celebrated. Where knowledge is currency. And yet, despite this golden age of learning, Timbuktu isn't immune to jealousy or rivalry. You hear rumors of other rulers, jealous kings in Morocco or Cairo, whispering about Mali's growing influence. You catch wind of merchants who feel threatened by Musa's power to shift trade routes with a single decision. And that's when you see another side of him. Musa isn't naive. He knows knowledge is power, but also a weapon. And so quietly, he begins strengthening alliances. He invites foreign scholars, but keeps them close. He funds schools, but ensures loyalty. He supports mosques, but insists on regular reports from their leaders. He's weaving a web not of deceit, but of control. You follow him into a council meeting where discussions bounce between trade taxes, building permits, and diplomatic envoys. And even here, you notice Musa always circles back to two things: faith and learning. Because in his eyes, those aren't just ideals, they're shields. Shields against ignorance, against division, against enemies both within and beyond Mali. As the sun sets over Timbuktu's skyline, mud brick minarets casting long shadows, you stand beside a king who is shaping more than just an empire. He's shaping the mind of a nation. One scholar, one student, one verse at a time, the morning sun beats down on a city far from home. Cairo gleaming on the banks of the Nile. And you're right in the middle of it, following a caravan that looks less like a traveling party and more like a royal circus on parade. This is Musa's Hajj, and nothing in history has ever moved like this. The numbers alone make your head spin. 60,000 people in his entourage. Soldiers, merchants, servants, slaves, wives, scribes, scholars, and camels. Hundreds of camels, each swaying under loads of gold, so much gold it seems to shimmer in waves under the desert sun. Your mainstream fact. In 1324, CE, Mansa Musa embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca that would stun the entire Islamic world, marking the first time West Africa's power and wealth entered global consciousness. But walking beside him now, it doesn't feel like a history book. It feels like you've joined the world's most extravagant road trip. You hear it before you see it whispers in the streets of Cairo as word spreads, the king of Mali has arrived, and with him an avalanche of gold. Musa walks into Cairo dressed not in heavy armor or jeweled crowns, but in flowing robes embroidered with subtle threads of gold. His manner is soft, his voice even softer. But when he speaks, people listen, not because of his volume, but because of his legend. And here's the quirky tidbit that still makes historians blink. Musa gave away so much gold in Cairo through gifts, charity, and trade that he caused massive inflation, destabilizing the local economy for over a decade. Prices soared, Markets wobbled, and Cairo's merchants could only watch as their currency bent under the weight of West Africa's generosity. Imagine walking into a city handing out so many millions in today's dollars and breaking the economy. By accident. Historians still argue whether Musa intended to make a grand political statement or simply didn't understand the ripple effect of his generosity. Some say it was economic diplomacy. Others think he just liked to give. You walk beside him, watching his quiet smile as coins spill into outstretched hands, and you wonder if maybe it was both. Because Musa doesn't just give, he connects. You're there when he meets the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt, a man named Al-Nasir Muhammad. It's a meeting wrapped in protocol full of silken words and carefully measured bows. The Sultan expects Musa to bend as all visiting rulers do. But Musa doesn't flinch. He speaks as an equal, not arrogant, not boastful, just certain. The king of Mali isn't a minor lord from the fringes of the world. He is a sovereign, a pilgrim, a man whose empire stands on gold, faith, and vision. And the Sultan, he nods. Respect given. After that, Cairo can't stop talking. Stories of Musa's wealth flood the streets. Merchants boast of meeting him. Poets sing about his generosity. Even scholars begin scribbling notes about the strange king from a land many thought was little more than legend. You follow the caravan as it pushes onward through the sands of Arabia toward Mecca. The pilgrimage isn't easy. The heat is relentless. The roads treacherous. But Musa never complains. You watch him walk among the pilgrims, sharing food, helping those who stumble, even sitting with the poor. And that's when you see it. Musa isn't here to flaunt wealth. He's here because this is who he is. A man of faith who just happens to be wrapped in more gold than most kingdoms ever see. When he finally reaches Mecca, the holy city shrouded in reverent silence, Musa steps forward, not as a king, but as a believer. You watch him pray beside strangers, hands open, head bowed. No entourage, no guards, just a man before his God. Historians still debate whether Musa's Hajj was a spiritual awakening, a political gambit, or a statement of global power. But here in this quiet moment beneath the desert stars, it feels much simpler. Musa didn't just bring gold to Mecca. He brought himself. And for all his wealth and might, that was always his greatest gift. You're still on the road with Musa, but this time, you're not watching him enter grand cities or bow before sultans. You're watching something stranger stories. They follow him like shadows. Even as he moves back toward Mali, whispers of his pilgrimage ripple across the desert, sail on merchant ships, and slip into distant courts. Wherever Musa goes, the stories go first, like envoys you can't see, but everyone seems to know. In bustling markets from Cairo to Constantinople, you hear them. There's a king in Africa whose camels carry gold dust. He gave away so much gold he broke Egypt's economy. He's richer than all the kings of Christendom combined. Your mainstream fact. After his legendary Hajj, Mansa Musa became the most famous African ruler in medieval Europe and the Islamic world, appearing on maps like the Catalan Atlas of 1375 holding a golden scepter and a nugget the size of a fist. But here's the quirky twist: most Europeans had never heard of Mali before Musa, and suddenly they're drawing him on maps, painting him in manuscripts, even inventing tales of kingdoms paved in gold. Historians still argue whether these exaggerated depictions were based on fact, rumor, or sheer envy. And you see it happen in real time. In Tunis, a merchant claims Musa owns a mountain of gold, so large it can be seen from space, a wild claim, considering telescopes won't exist for centuries. In Venice, a trader swears Musa's palace walls are solid gold. You almost laugh, until you hear a banker in Genoa referencing Musa's treasure in serious negotiations. The line between truth and legend blurs. But Musa, he says nothing. You walk beside him on the long journey home, expecting him to revel in his fame, or at least comment on it. But he doesn't. He listens, he watches, and he plans. because Musa knows something the world hasn't figured out yet. Fame is a double-edged sword. It opens doors and it invites enemies. As the caravan inches back across the Sahara, you watch him send envoys ahead, quiet men carrying messages of goodwill, trade offers, and carefully worded alliances. Musa's pilgrimage may be over, but his diplomatic campaign is only beginning. He returns to Mali not just as a king, but as a legend in the making. Historians still debate whether Musa's newfound fame was a strategic move or a happy accident. Was the Hajj meant as a PR stunt for Mali? Or did the fame simply follow where generosity led? Either way, Musa understands its power, and he wastes no time using it. In Gao, he strengthens trade agreements with neighboring kingdoms. In Janneh, he funds the building of a grand market square. In Niani, he holds council with foreign envoys newly curious about this golden kingdom in the west. And always, you see him balancing. Fame, after all, brings friends and rivals. You hear whispers of jealous rulers in North Africa, of European traders scheming ways to tap into Mali's wealth, of Arab chroniclers eager to twist his story. But Musa isn't rattled. Instead, you watch him build quietly, strengthening borders, securing alliances, cementing trade deals that will outlast his name. And you realize you're walking with a man who knows that legends fade. But legacies, they echo. By now you realize Musa's power isn't just in the gold he controls, it's in the stories that carry his name far beyond the borders of Mali. But stories have a life of their own. You walk through a busy port in Alexandria watching sailors argue over crates of spices and silk when you hear it again. Mansa Musa's name. Only this time, the story sounds different. He has a palace made entirely of gold, a merchant brags. No, another says he eats from golden plates, drinks rainwater mixed with crushed emeralds. Bah! His camels wear golden shoes, you can't help but smile. None of this is true, of course, and yet, maybe that's the point. Your mainstream fact. After Musa's pilgrimage, European and Arab chroniclers exaggerated his wealth so dramatically, his name became synonymous with unimaginable riches, fueling legends that would later inspire explorers, treasure hunters, and even colonial empires. And here's the quirky twist. Some medieval maps placed Mali as a land where rivers flowed with gold, a fantasy so persistent it endured for centuries. Historians still argue whether these myths were simple exaggerations or deliberate fantasies designed to lure fortune seekers toward Africa. But you're walking with the real Musa, the man who knows how dangerous a story can be. He returns to Mali with the weight of fame hanging on his shoulders like a second crown. And while others dream of gold, Musa dreams of something far harder to capture: stability. You watch him shift from pilgrim to statesman almost overnight. First, he tightens Mali's networks of alliances, securing loyalty not just with gifts, but with shared interests. He offers trade deals to rival chiefs, marries off royal relatives to neighboring kingdoms, and invites foreign merchants to settle in Mali's markets under favorable terms. Where some kings rule with swords, Musa rules with contracts. You see him rework tax laws, ensuring that Mali's vast trade profits flow not just into royal treasuries, but into the hands of merchants, artisans, and community leaders. It's a delicate dance balancing generosity with control. Historians still debate whether this system was a genuine attempt at wealth distribution or a clever way to bind powerful classes to the crown. You suspect walking alongside him it was both. And then, almost unnoticed, Musa turns his attention to culture. You're there when he summons architects from Cairo and Al-Andalus to design new mosques, libraries, and schools across Mali's cities. These aren't just buildings, they're statements. Mali isn't a backwater kingdom, it's a beacon of civilization. And still, the stories follow. In Venice, maps depict Musa crowned in jewels holding a golden orb. In Lisbon, rumors spread of an empire so rich its people use gold for nails and roof tiles. You hear the whispers, see the raised eyebrows of foreign visitors. And through it all, Musa stays silent. Because while the world talks, he builds. He expands Mali's influence deeper into the Niger River Valley, sends explorers to map trade routes, and establishes new caravan hubs along the Sahara. You follow him to a newly built mosque in Jenne, where scholars gather from as far as Persia. You stand with him on the banks of the Niger as traders unload goods from boats that have sailed for weeks. And that's when it hits you. Musa isn't chasing fame. He's letting fame chase him. And with every step, every story, every whispered legend, you see Mali's shadow stretch longer across the world map. You expect a triumphant return, the kind where a king rides into his capital gold banners, waving crowds cheering his name. But Musa, he comes home the same way he's always moved, quietly, intentionally, with a gaze that seems fixed on a horizon no one else can see. By the time the caravan finally reaches Niani, months have passed since he left Mecca. The pilgrims have dispersed, the foreign dignitaries have returned home, and the legends. Oh, they've sprinted ahead of him like wildfire. In Mali, people speak his name with a kind of hushed awe. Children mimic his regal stride. Traders boast of selling him wares they never laid eyes on. Even griots, those keepers of Mali's oral history, begin weaving Musa into the fabric of their songs. But you notice something else too. The weight of fame lingers on him like a mantle woven from gold and expectation. Your mainstream fact. After his Hajj Musa's reign entered its most ambitious phase, marked by massive architectural projects, expanded trade, and deeper diplomatic ties. But here's the quirky little insight most people miss. Despite his global fame, Musa slipped back into Mali without grand fanfare. No parades, no royal decrees. Historians still argue whether this was calculated humility or a quiet acknowledgement that fame once unleashed is a force no man can command. You walk beside him through the streets of Niani, past mud brick homes and open markets, and you notice he's changed. Not in wealth, not in titles, in purpose. The man who left as a king returns as a visionary. He wastes no time. You're with him when he meets with his council, laying out plans that feel bigger than any kingdom-building mosques across Mali, commissioning scholars to translate foreign texts, sending envoys to courts from Cairo to Grenada. Mali, he insists, will not just be known for its gold. It will be known for its mind. And then there's the shift you almost miss. Musa begins reducing his public appearances. He delegates court duties to trusted advisors, stepping back from the spotlight he never sought. Instead, he focuses on long-term projects, city planning, educational reforms, religious outreach. Some say he was tired. Others claim he was plotting something even bigger. Historians still debate it. But you see the truth. Musa wasn't retreating. He was anchoring Mali's future in something stronger than a single man's shadow. In Timbuktu, you watch builders lay the foundations of the Jingareber Mosque, its walls rising under the careful hands of architects from far-off lands. In Gao, you hear scholars reciting texts newly translated into local languages. In trade hubs, you see Musa's influence in standardized coinage, fair tax policies, and protected trade routes. And through it all, Musa remains calm, measured, focused. You hear people ask, why doesn't he flaunt his fame? Why not use it to conquer more lands? Claim new thrones, but you know the answer. Musa isn't interested in ruling for the sake of power. He's interested in ruling for the sake of legacy. He's seen how fame can distort, how gold can tempt, how power can poison. So instead of chasing more, he builds deeper. And that's when it dawns on you his quiet return wasn't the end of his story. It was the real beginning. You find yourself walking the sun-baked streets of Timbuktu, but this time it feels different. The markets hum louder, the alleys feel tighter, and the air carries a buzz of something you can't quite name. Growth. You see it in the way new buildings rise beside ancient ones. Mud brick mosques crowned with timber beams. Houses expanded to fit merchant families arriving from every corner of Africa. The city you first glimpsed as a dusty trading outpost is now pulsing like a living heart. And at the center of this heartbeat, Musa. He didn't just return home to rest, he returned to transform. Your mainstream fact, under Musa's guidance, Timbuktu rose to become West Africa's greatest center of trade learning and Islamic culture, known across the medieval world as a place where knowledge met commerce. But here's the quirky tidbit you overhear in the market square. People say the streets of Timbuktu became so crowded during Musa's reign that merchants joked about charging rent for standing space. Some even claim the scent of ink and parchment drifted stronger in the air than spices or gold. You walk with Musa as he inspects the latest addition to his dream, the Sankarani Mosque and Madrasa, its slender minaret reaching like a finger toward the cloudless sky. Students sit cross-legged inside quills, scratching across parchment as teachers discuss everything from astronomy to theology. Musa moves among them with a soft smile, speaking little but watching everything. You notice how he asks questions a king unafraid to learn from a scholar, a ruler who bends his ear to wisdom instead of expecting the world to bow to his crown. And you realize Musa isn't building monuments to himself. He's building a city that will outlast him. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's golden age came solely from Musa's vision, or if he simply amplified what was already growing. But standing here amid the hum of learning, you don't care about the debate. You care about the living proof in front of you, a city on fire with ideas. And that fire spreads. You travel with Musa's emissaries as they invite scholars from Egypt, Granada, and Persia. You meet traders drawn by fair taxes and safe roads. You listen to students from villages you've never heard of recite poetry in open squares. And all the while, Musa remains a quiet force in the background, not a king on a throne, but a man standing among his people. You're there when the first university in Timbuktu is formally recognized, its library swelling with manuscripts on law, science, and philosophy. You watch scribes bundle texts that will someday survive centuries of invasion, colonization, and war. And you wonder, did Musa know, did he realize he wasn't just building for his time? But for all time, you hope so. Because here in the winding streets of Timbuktu, you see it clear as the desert sky. Musa didn't make Timbuktu famous, he made it unforgettable. And in doing so, he carved his name into the heart of a city that still whispers his story in every dusty street and scholar's chant. The morning sun slides across Timbuktu's skyline, painting the mud brick walls in soft gold. And today you follow Musa not to a market or a school, but to something grander, a building project unlike anything West Africa has ever seen. The Jingarabar Mosque. You stand in the shifting dust as workers haul timbers, shape clay bricks, and hoist beams toward the sky. This isn't just another mosque. It's a statement, a testament to faith, power, and vision, all rolled into one. Your mainstream fact. In 1327, Mansa Musa commissioned the Jingarabar Mosque, built by architects from Andalusia and Cairo, blending local Sudano-Sahelian styles with Islamic design. The mosque stands to this day as a symbol of Mali's golden age, but here's the quirky footnote that doesn't make the history book's legend. Says Musa paid the architect Abu Ishaq Saheli an astonishing 200 kilograms of gold for his work. Enough to make even the most seasoned builder rethink their career path. You watch Musa step carefully through the half-finished mosque, his sandals pressing soft marks into the damp clay floor. He pauses beside the architect not to give orders but to ask questions. You hear them discuss everything from the thickness of the walls to the placement of windows for maximum airflow. And you realize this isn't a king obsessed with monuments. It's a leader obsessed with meaning. Historians still argue whether Musa designed the mosque's intricate details himself or simply guided the vision. Some say he drafted sketches. Others believe he left it entirely to the architect. But standing here, you see the answer in the way he moves attentive, involved, deeply present. You stroll beside him as he speaks with laborers, thanking them by name. You see him offer extra pay to brickmakers, ensure fair treatment for workers, and even share meals with the builders. In a world where kings often ruled with distant commands, Musa rules with presence. And it's not just about the mosque. It's about setting a standard. You hear it in his words, this mosque isn't just for worship. It's a beacon, a gathering place, a heart for Timbuktu's community, a signal to the world that Mali isn't just a land of gold, but a land of faith, knowledge, and unity. You walk with him through the streets as word spreads. Traders pause to catch a glimpse of the rising walls. Scholars nod in approval. Even rivaled chieftains murmur their respect. And you notice something unexpected. The people don't just admire the building, they admire the man. Not for his wealth, not even for his power, but for his willingness to stand among them, sleeves, rolled hands, dusty heart open. This is leadership you realize not from above but from beside. Historians still debate whether the Jingareber Mosque marked the height of Musa's influence or merely a milestone along his journey. But walking through its shadow, you feel the truth press soft and sure against your heart. This isn't just a building. It's a message in mud and timber echoing across centuries. A whisper that says, I was here, and I built something that mattered. You step softly into the cool shadows of a library, its walls lined with leather-bound manuscripts. The scent of ink and parchment thick in the air. Outside the city hums with trade and the rhythm of daily life, but in here, the world slows down. And standing at the heart of it all is Musa. Not with a crown, not with a sword, but with a scroll in his hands. Your mainstream fact. Under Mansa Musa's reign, Timbuktu became home to some of the greatest libraries and centers of learning in Africa, with scholars copying, translating, and preserving texts from across the Islamic world. Some of these manuscripts still survive testimonies to a legacy few kings can claim. But here's the quirky little gem legends say. Musa insisted on paying scribes not per page but per quality of work, offering bonuses for particularly well-crafted scripts or beautifully decorated margins. Imagine getting a raise for your perfect penmanship. You watch as scribes dip their reeds into ink letters flowing across pages in elegant curves. They write in Arabic, but the voices you hear come from every language spoken across Mali. Musa moves among them quietly, reading, asking questions, sometimes even sitting to listen as scholars recite aloud. He isn't just funding these projects, he's fueling them. Historians still argue whether Musa truly grasped the scale of what he was creating, a network of knowledge that would ripple across generations, or if he simply wanted to make Timbuktu famous. But walking beside him, watching him pore over a newly translated work on astronomy, you feel the truth. Musa wasn't just building libraries, he was building a legacy of learning. You follow him through Mali's growing centers of scholarship, Genegauniani, each sprouting schools, mosques, and libraries like seeds in fertile ground. Students from distant lands arrive drawn by whispers of Timbuktu's riches, not just in gold, but in knowledge. And Musa welcomes them all. You hear debates crackle in open-air courtyards, theology, mathematics, philosophy, even medicine. You sit beside a circle of scholars arguing over trade routes using maps copied from distant Arab geographers. And you see Musa not as a king presiding over his domain, but as a gardener, tending to a garden of ideas. But knowledge like gold is a currency that can make enemies as fast as it makes allies. You hear jealous rulers whisper that Mali is growing too powerful, that its scholars are spreading dangerous ideas of reform, freedom, and faith. You watch Musa respond not with armies, but with alliances. He strengthens ties with Egypt, sends envoys to Morocco, even welcomes European merchants into Mali's ports carefully on his terms. Historians still debate whether this diplomatic finesse was genius politics or cautious pragmatism, but walking beside him, you see it for what it is. Musa wasn't expanding an empire. He was anchoring it in ideas and knowledge in people. And in the quiet hum of scribes, the soft murmurs of debate, the careful hands copying sacred texts, you realize something profound. Gold can be stolen. Thrones can fall. But knowledge? Knowledge endures, and that you suspect is exactly what Musa planned all along. The years slide by like sand through your fingers. You walk beside Musa as his empire reaches its shimmering peak, its markets bursting with trade, its libraries alive with scholars, its borders stretching farther than any before him dared to dream. But you also start to feel something else creeping in at the edges. Tension. Nothing in this world stays untouched by time. Mali's neighbors watch with wary eyes. Rival chieftains grumble about taxes. Merchants in distant ports wonder aloud if Musa's grip on gold will last forever. The bigger the empire, the more cracks appear beneath its gilded surface. And Musa. He feels it too. Your mainstream fact. In the later years of his reign, Musa faced growing political challenges, rising tensions with rival states' internal disputes, and the ever-present threat of rebellion. No empire, not even one paved in gold, is immune to power struggles. But here's the quirky bit of history rather than quashing dissent with brute force. Musa often resolved conflicts with what historians call gold diplomacy, offering generous gifts or trade concessions to smooth over tensions. You almost admire it, until you realize how much gold that actually cost him. You travel with him to border towns where alliances feel thinner than the desert air. You watch him negotiate with tribal leaders over cups of sweetened tea, weaving promises as carefully as a griot spins a tale. And here's where it hits you. Musa isn't just a king now, he's a tightrope walker, balancing power, wealth, faith, and ambition on a line stretched over the roaring winds of history. Historians still debate whether he held that balance with wisdom or simply postponed the inevitable unraveling of a vast, unwieldy empire. But you see him walking that line with grace few could manage. In Gao, you watch him settle a dispute between rival merchants with a mix of humor, patience, and yes, a hefty pouch of gold dust. In Janae, you see him kneel beside a grieving family, offering both words of comfort and a scholarship for their child to study in Timbuktu. He rules with power, but also with presence. And yet even the greatest rulers can't hold back time. You notice Musa growing quieter in court, speaking less but watching more. You hear whispers that he spends long hours in prayer alone, far from the bustle of the capital. Some say he's tired. Others say he's plotting his final masterpiece. Historians still argue whether these later years mark his gradual withdrawal or his most strategic phase. But standing beside him as he gazes out over the Niger River at sunset, you sense a deeper truth. Musa understands what most kings never do. An empire isn't built on conquest. It's built on trust, and trust must be tended or it fades. You follow him on quiet walks through Niani, where he greets children in the streets and merchants in the markets. You stand with him at mosque doorways as he offers silent prayers, and you realize he's preparing, not for expansion, but for endurance. Because Musa knows the tides of power shift, and when they do, it won't be the gold or the armies that hold Mali together. It will be the relationships he's spent a lifetime building. You follow Musa into the quiet years, the years historians skim over the ones that slip between the grand tales of gold and glory. But here in the hush of fading footsteps is where the story sharpens. He is older now. The fire that once drove him across deserts and into foreign courts has dimmed, but only on the surface. You see it in his eyes, a slow-burning ember that refuses to die. He walks the palace grounds of Niani with the ease of a man who has nothing left to prove. Children pause their games when he passes. Merchants bow, but not out of fear, out of habit, out of memory. You catch whispers in the market. There goes the king who made Mali gold, but Musa. He hardly seems to notice. Your mainstream fact. By the 1330s, Mansa Musa began transferring power to his son, Mansa Magha, preparing him to inherit an empire stretched across the Sahara and known throughout the Islamic world. It wasn't a forced abdication. It was a slow handoff, a lesson in leadership by a man who understood that true power lives beyond a single lifetime. And here's the quirky tale you keep hearing from different mouths. Some say Musa didn't die in a royal chamber or on a battlefield. They say he disappeared, walked into the desert alone like his predecessor, seeking peace with his creator. Historians still debate if this was truth or legend, a symbol of how gracefully he slipped out of history's spotlight. But the signs are all there. You notice he no longer presides over every council. You see him listening more, speaking less, letting his advisors and Maga handle affairs. Yet every time a decision of weight hangs in the air, all eyes still drift to him. You follow him to Timbuktu, to Gao, to Jenne cities he helped mold, from markets into metropolises. He visits mosques, meets with scholars, blesses merchants. And every handshake, every quiet word carries the weight of years. You sense it too, the balancing act he's maintaining. Historians often say the twilight of an empire begins with the fading of its brightest star. Some claim Mali's decline started the moment Musa loosened his grip. Others argue he had no choice. An empire of this scale couldn't survive without its architect at the helm. But you watch him differently. You see a man shaping the future by stepping back, not holding on. He knows power isn't meant to be clutched until your knuckles crack. It's meant to be passed wisely, carefully, like the handling of a fragile heirloom. You travel with him as he visits border provinces, not as a conqueror reclaiming lands, but as a father checking on his extended family. He settles disputes between tribal leaders with his trademark mix of generosity and quiet firmness. He offers gold where gold is needed, advice where words hold more weight. In Gao, you watch him sit beneath a baobab tree with rival merchantmen who months before would have gladly cut each other's throats. Musa listens to both sides, nods once, and lays down a deal so simple, so fair, they both leave richer. This is a leadership by presence, by patience. But even patience meets its limit. You begin to hear faint cracks, rumblings of unrest in the outer regions, whispers of rivals eyeing Mali's trade routes. The empire is too vast, its borders too stretched. No amount of gold can buy complete peace, and yet Musa doesn't flinch. Instead, he strengthens alliances not with swords, but with schools. He funds more madrasas, sends scholars as envoys, signs treaties sealed with faith, not fear. Historians still argue whether this was inspired statesmanship or the last quiet gasp of a golden age slipping into history. But you see it in Musa's eyes, a knowing calm, a silent certainty. He isn't fighting the future. He's preparing Mali for it. One afternoon, standing on a hill outside Niani, you watch him gaze across the land, over the golden haze of the Niger River Valley, past the markets, the mosques, the libraries. And for the first time, you hear him speak plainly. All this he says softly was never mine to keep, only mine to grow. It's not a declaration, it's an understanding. And suddenly you realize you've been watching a man write his legacy not in gold, not in stone, but in people, in connections, in the quiet, steady hum of a world he carefully stitched together. You walk with him on what will be one of his last known journeys, a visit to the River Mosque, where scholars now study texts from 3 continents. Musa stands in its shadow, silent hands clasped behind his back eyes, following a group of children running past. He smiles, and in that smile you see it all. the rise, the journey, the letting go. Because kings may die, empires may fall, but what Musa built if tended could outlive them all. You find yourself standing at the edge of a chapter, quietly closing the final pages of Musa's life, unfolding not in grand battles or golden triumphs, but in the soft, deliberate acts of a man making peace with his legacy. The empire still hums around him. Caravans stretch across the Sahara. Scholars debate beneath the cool shadows of Timbuktu's mosques. Traders in Jenne still barter over salt and gold. On the surface, Mali thrives, but beneath that glittering veneer, the tides are shifting. You hear it in the murmurs of visiting merchants who speak of rising competition from northern trade routes. You sense it in the tense conversations between Mali's governors, each guarding their own corner of the empire just a little too fiercely. You catch the subtle fear in the eyes of younger rulers, unsure whether they can carry the weight Musa bore so quietly for so long. Your mainstream fact. After Musa's death, whether in 1337 or slightly later, Mali began a slow, inevitable decline, challenged by both internal strife and external pressures. The golden age he forged endured for a time, but no empire, however wealthy or wise, holds its peak forever. But here's the curious little twist history rarely highlights in the final years of his life. Musa didn't seek to conquer more lands or accumulate more wealth. Instead, he doubled down on relationships, strengthening bonds with scholars, religious leaders, and trusted advisors. You walk with him through the markets of Niani, watching as he exchanges quiet words with merchants he's known for decades. You stand beside him in prayer halls where he bows beside strangers without ceremony or guard. You watch him share meals with traveling scholars, listening more than he speaks. He moves like a man both part of his empire and preparing to part from it. Historians still argue whether this quiet withdrawal was a conscious strategy or the natural retreat of a man whose race was nearly run. But as you watch him smile gently at a young boy reciting a verse in the mosque, you see a man who understands that some legacies speak louder in whispers than in war cries. And this is what strikes you most. Even as his physical presence fades, Musa's influence grows stronger, woven into the very identity of Mali. You hear it in the way people reference his name, not as a conqueror, but as a builder, a teacher, a king who didn't just rule over gold, but over hearts. One evening, as the sun melts into the Niger River, you find him sitting alone on a low stone wall. No advisors, no scribes. Just a man watching the empire he built breathe around him. He speaks softly, almost to himself. Gold buys loyalty, he murmurs. But trust. Trust builds nations. It's not a lesson from a king. It's a quiet truth from a man who's seen the best and worst of power. And it lingers with you as you walk with him through his final days. Simple acts of leadership, simple gestures of faith. He welcomes new scholars into Timbuktu, funds another library in Gao, mediates a border dispute with calm efficiency. Always present, always listening, always leading not with force but with faith. You realize then Musa didn't build an empire for himself. He built it for the world he would never live to see. Historians will continue to argue. Legends will grow larger maps, more colorful stories, more exaggerated. His fortune will be measured, debated, and distorted. But you'll remember him for this moment, the quiet man on a stone wall, watching a setting sun with the satisfaction of a life poured into something far greater than gold. Because long after kings fall and empires fade, the hands that build with wisdom leave fingerprints on history no time can erase. And now, you ease back the sounds of Musa's world softening around you. The golden cities fade into silhouettes. The hum of Timbuktu's markets, the rustle of parchment in ancient libraries, the low murmur of traders crossing endless deserts, They all settle into a distant echo like the fading ripples of a story well told. You feel the gentle weight of centuries resting in the quiet between heartbeats. Mansa Musa's journey wasn't loud, it wasn't always glorious, but it was steady, a slow unfolding of a life that shaped a world. He walked where few dared build, where few dreamed and planted seeds of knowledge that would grow long after the last coin of his treasury was spent. And as you drift in this quiet, you realize the true power of Musa's story isn't the gold, the conquests, or the legends scrawled on ancient maps. It's the reminder that legacy isn't carved in stone or cast in riches. It's written in the hands you lift up, in the trust you build, in the wisdom you leave behind. So tonight, as the soft hum of the world rocks you gently towards sleep, let Musa's quiet legacy remind you that sometimes the greatest kings are the ones who know when to lead from beside, when to give more than they take, and when to step back and watch the seeds they've sown bloom long after they've gone. Breathe slow. Let your mind drift with the desert wind, and let the echoes of a golden age settle softly around you. You're safe. You're home. And the story will always be here when you wake. End of script. Sweet dreams.